Hello, good afternoon. How are you guys? So today I am painting another member of the Canio family, Julia, always dishing out some amazing references. And it's a super warm painting. So a few of you guys have asked a couple times about why I start with the ground that I do, that quinacridone red. And this painting is a perfect example of where that ground works really well. Because there's a little question segment at the end, so I'll save it. Anyway, first I wanted to talk about something I've observed that I try to avoid in painting, and I've come to call it the filter effect, where if you have a painting that for example, if you have a painting and it's a picture of someone under a red light, it's gonna be hard not to just paint that painting with red and black and have those be your only two values. But even though that might be a very chromatic painting, being that like the red is very saturated and maybe you'll have your shadows be a saturated blue, it's still very monochromatic. It's just two colors, and that's fine. But if you're trying to make your painting a little more interesting, you have to find ways to sneak in some hue variation in there. And I find that you can get away with a lot of hue variation, nonsensical hue variation, most of the time, as long as your values are correct. And so I struggled in this painting. It took me a while to find where I would sneak in the varied hues, or like what I would call the outlier colors. Because what happens with this filter effect is that even if the painting has a lot of hue variation, but you paint it in a way where all your highlights are the same color and all your midtones are the same color and all your shadows are the same color, it's gonna look boring. It's gonna look monochromatic, and it's gonna look it's gonna look like it has a filter on it. Like the filter decides that this value is gonna be toned in this way and that the next value is gonna be toned in that way. And it can seem a little bit formulaic, and if not formulaic, like lazy or not knowing any better. And so what I tend to do is look for the parts in the painting where the hue doesn't really matter. See if I were to sneak in some green hues in the face just for the sake of variation, that would very much change the painting, giving as opposed to having the beautiful like pink, yellow skin tones cascading over the forms of the face. It would be like it would look like someone that is sick, because we associate like a nice red flush face with health. And if there's like a lot of green and blue in someone's face, they look like a zombie. If they look like pasty. And so that's something to be mindful of. And that's totally fine if like that's what you're going for, or you don't care to maintain the warmth of the colors that are in the image. But say that you wanted to reserve the warmth of the face, which in this case I wanted to. The face is super warm in this painting, with very little hue variation in it, actually. So I was like, let's go somewhere where the hue doesn't matter. Like the legs, for example. There's like that nasty gray green snuck into the shadow of the leg. And the best place, like the place that really made it for me, and I found added a lot and like broke the painting out of that filter effect, where it seemed like any color that I put down on the canvas had to be within the range of red. I wanted to break that, and I broke that right here in the shirt. That shirt, though it might look like just titanium white in the video, it's actually tinted with yellow, with cad yellow light, and with phthalo blue, and that makes for like a very electric pale green. And it's not like a pastel-y color because of the intensity of that the green makes when you mix the yellow cad yellow light and the phthalo blue, both very strong colors to have, and then to mix them together is, you're not gonna get a dull color with that mix. And so yeah, that when I put in that splotch of that tinted green right on the shirt, it alleviated so much of the concern that I had in going forward in the painting. And then you'll see later that I put a little bit of in the same manner, I have like a very bright but strongly tinted electric blue on the right side on the shirt, where the light is hitting her a little bit on the arm. And so then that lets the viewer know that, cool, this painting isn't only confined to colors that are warm or well within the range of red on the color spectrum. And I always try to achieve that, because back in the day when I was a little bit more stubborn about my paints and my color mixes and what I wanted my paintings to look like, I would often be super picky about my paintings on the colors on my palette and what colors would get to go on the painting. And it was always the same pink and purple and orange and maybe some blue, but it was all to like feed this sunset fever dream type of aesthetic. And it was cool, and I loved it while I was doing it and while I was in that sort of phase. But it despite having like all those 5 different colors being really pretty together, it got to be really monochromatic and really boring, and I wasn't about it anymore. And then I found out that you can like still make beautiful looking landscapes with greens and yellows. If you guys remember, I mentioned in my first video that for a long time I was against using yellow or green in my palette, because I thought they were really harsh and really cold and not conducive to the feeling that I was trying to find in my paintings. But the thing is, when you have those colors in there contrasting against the colors that you do care about, it does them a favor, it lets the pretty colors shine all the more in their glory, just by virtue of being sat next to a color that might not be so pleasing. So yeah, that is the filter effect, and that is how I deal with it. I'll let you guys know if I come up with a cooler name for it. And definitely please let me know in the comments if you have dealt with a similar phenomenon in your paintings, because I don't think I'm alone in that, and I think it's probably something that several painters come across. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe no one was ever as picky with color as I was in the beginning, but I doubt that. So I do have a few questions today that rolled over from yesterday. A few of them will repeat. I'm going to try to be mindful about if I have repeated questions and such, and some of them are kind of ridiculous, like if I will hide an obscene image in the painting, which I will not. There's no obscene imagery in that painting. But thanks for your question. So let's see. Why do I start with a bright red ground? So the reason for that is because, oh yeah, right, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's so many areas in this painting where I was able to just like not even have to worry about and not even paint and just let the ground shine through, because there's such a warm painting and there was so many like beautiful red and orange glowing shadows on her face and on like her legs and everything. And in some areas the ground just shone through and like kind of did the work for me. And that's basically why I start with the bright ground, because it can save me a lot of work. If you go into a white canvas and you start painting on top of like a just gessoed white canvas or panel, you will, if you have to go through great effort and a sort of tedious, unnecessary method of filling in all the spots in which the white of the primed canvas will shine through. Some people might not mind that look of the white of the canvas shining through, but me and a couple people I know are not fans of it at all in our work, and we just do our best to not let it happen. So if I color my ground in a vibrant color, I just don't have to worry about that. And it doesn't have to be a vibrant color like this. I like when it pokes through, and it hasn't given me a reason not to use it. But it is an expensive color, I think, to use just for the ground. So all that to say, you could use like an umber, and really what matters is that you want it to be somewhere in the middle of the value range between 1 and 10. You want it to be somewhere around like 5 or 6. Like some people prefer to go a little lighter, but yeah. And the reason for that is so that when you're mixing your colors, you're not mixing in a biased manner. Like if you're mixing on a white palette, you might tend to make your colors a little darker. Hold on. Let's say if you were mixing on a black palette, yeah. No. If you were mixing on a black palette, you would probably make your colors brighter than they have to be, and vice versa. If you were mixing on a white palette, you would probably make them brighter than they have to be, just because of the contrast. So in a paintings are just full of midtones. Most of a painting, I think, is typically comprised of tones ranging from like 3 to 7 on the value scale. So it is helpful to you to have like a mid-toned ground on your painting and a mid-toned ground on your palette. I have a gray palette and it works fine. I have been in instances where I have to use a white palette, and I did not enjoy it at all. Alright, moving on. Thank you for the question. List 2 pet peeves. 2 pet peeves are blending. I don't like when people blend in oil painting, and using too much white. Using white as your highlight instead of seeking out the hue and the light. Thank you for your question. And what brand of oil paint would I recommend? I recommend Gamblin. I use Gamblin, and I like their packaging, and that's about it. If you need to save some money, Gamblin 1980 works just fine. I use it, but then I'm not the most picky, or I don't pay close attention to color. Like, no color has failed me yet, regardless of the brand that I buy. Like, it would have to be like a ridiculously cheap brand for you to like really notice the effect, the detrimental effect it has. And the only difference between cheap paints and like quality paints is the amount of filler they have in them compared to the amount of actual pigment. So just be mindful of that. Like you might save some money, but the tube will last you a less amount of time. But if you spend more money, the color will probably be truer to itself, and there won't be as much filler or any filler to mute down the color, and it'll last you much longer. You'll have to use a lot less paint for the same amount that you would with cheaper brands. Thank you for your question. Is art my main source of income? Am I financially independent? Ooh. Art is not my main source of income, and I'm absolutely not financially independent. I absolutely hope to have art be my main source of income eventually. But yeah, I'm just working toward that. Slowly, patiently. Thank you. What do I do to keep fit? I do not. What's my favorite zoo animal? I don't know that I like that. My favorite zoo animal. I don't know. I don't like zoos. And thank you for the positive vibes. Alright, that's it for questions. And that's it for today's video. So thank you guys so much for joining me again. Thank you so much for all those that sent questions in. And I will see you again tomorrow with a self-portrait. Have a good night and stay kind.